John G. Lake healed entire crowds. The blind saw, cancers vanished, the sick leaped from their beds. But when his wife Jenny collapsed in South Africa, consumed by the brutal pace of ministry, he couldn't save her. Just months after they'd abandoned everything to preach among the poorest, Jenny stopped waking. She died at 35 while caring for the sick who waited for John. He, the man who laid hands on thousands, watched helplessly as the woman he loved faded away. That December night in 1908, kneeling beside Jenny's body, John broke. "Lord, why?" he whispered into the suffocating silence. The ministry he'd prioritized above all else had demanded a price he'd never imagined paying. That pain would break him, but it would also remake him. He would become obsessed, waging war against disease, sin, and death with an intensity few men have ever known. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story set your heart on fire, don't let that flame die. Subscribe now. Every week we bring you new heroes of faith, men and women who were tested in the fire, because the same God who proved John G. Lake still sets hearts ablaze with fire. That African night, John remained there longer than the mind can count, kneeling, voiceless. Jenny's body no longer responded to touch. The room, once full of footsteps and pleas, now held a silence that wounded. A man came to the door, murmured something about arrangements and candles. John nodded without looking. There were pains that accepted no words. He closed his eyes, touched his wedding ring with his thumb, and deep down heard the first sound that always returned when everything shattered. His mother's voice calling the names of children who never grew up. Memory yanked him backward with violence. Snow covering a small mound in the yard, frozen hands holding those of a brother who wouldn't wake. The pastor saying God was good, that death wasn't the end. John was 8 years old and already understood that some questions had no answers that brought relief. 16 children born into the Lake family. 8 would never reach adulthood. A strange digestive disease stalked the bloodline like a curse, devouring them one after another. Doctors couldn't explain it. They gave different names, but the result was always the same: fever, pain, weakness, funeral. John caught the disease too, but survived. He didn't know why. He carried the guilt of being alive while they buried the others. His father worked with hands that never stopped, a man who believed survival was a form of worship. He built, he fixed, he provided, but he couldn't fix what devoured his children. His mother prayed with a conviction that frightened him. She spoke to God like someone demanding answers from a friend who owed her explanations. When the fever took little Thomas, she didn't collapse. She stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and kept cooking for the ones who remained. John learned 2 things in that house. Life was fragile, and faith was a fight. They moved frequently. Ontario to Michigan, Michigan to Illinois. Each move a fresh start, each start shadowed by loss. He grew tall, serious, older than his years. While other boys played, he worked. While others dreamed, he calculated. By the time he reached young adulthood, John had become someone people trusted with important things: contracts, numbers, insurance policies. He sold security, protection against disaster. The irony didn't escape him. He couldn't protect his own siblings, but strangers paid him to promise their safety. He was good at it, built a solid reputation, made decent money, married Jenny Stevens, a woman with gentle eyes and a laugh that warmed rooms. She was small, delicate, and stronger than she appeared. They had children. Life moved forward as it should. John began to believe that perhaps he'd escaped the shadow that hunted his family. But shadows don't forget addresses. Jenny got sick, not dramatically at first. A persistent cough, afternoon fevers, exhaustion that sleep couldn't correct. Doctors used careful words that meant little and cost much. Tuberculosis, they said, or maybe heart disease, maybe something they couldn't name. She faded slowly, like color draining from fabric left too long in the sun. John tried everything: different doctors, better specialists, expensive treatments that required selling furniture and skipping meals. Nothing worked. He watched her shrink into the bed, watched his children tiptoe past her room, watched his own helplessness become a weight he carried in his chest like stone. Then someone mentioned a place: Zion City. A man named John Alexander Dowie, who prayed for the sick, not like a priest offering comfort, but like a general issuing orders. John dismissed the idea at first. It seemed excessive, emotional, dangerous. But desperation has a way of redefining what's reasonable. When the doctor said Jenny had hours, not days, he had nothing left to lose. They went. And in a simple room, without ornaments or theatrics, just direct words spoken over Jenny's fragile body, something happened. Color returned to her face. Her breathing stabilized. Her eyes opened, clear for the first time in months. She sat up in bed, smiled, asked for water. And John, the man who calculated risks for a living, understood he'd entered territory where numbers no longer governed. That wasn't just a miracle, it was a rupture. The world he'd belonged to, of contracts, profits, and predictability, lost all gravity. And a world that once seemed irrational, of faith, prayer, and invisible power, became solid as rock beneath his feet. He could no longer live divided between the two. Something in him had been reconfigured at the deepest level. He began praying for the sick. Timid at first, then with growing boldness. Impossible cases yielded. A farmer with a crushed leg stood up. A suffocating child breathed. A dying mother danced. News spread through small towns. Call Lake. And he went, always with the memory of small coffins chasing him like ghosts demanding vengeance. That was it. He couldn't bear losing anyone else to death. But work in business began to suffocate. Client meetings on one side, the dying on the other, polished contracts here, screams of pain there. The tension tore him in half. The more he saw God's power move, the less he could pretend that selling insurance policies held any eternal meaning. One morning, after months of internal war that stole his sleep, he made the decision that would change everything. He'd sell the business, leave financial security, live entirely by faith. Jenny listened in silence when he told her. When he finished speaking, expecting resistance or at least hesitation, she didn't waver. "Then let's go," she said simply. As if leaving wealth, comfort, and security to pursue the invisible were the most natural thing in the world. Her yes made more noise in heaven than all the criticism combined on earth. Then came the word he tried to ignore for months: Africa. Not as a gentle suggestion, as a command that grew in volume until it deafened, first whispered in prayers, then shouted in dreams that woke him sweating. John resisted with all his strength. There was so much to do here, so many sick in America. Why cross an ocean? But the word wouldn't let go. Africa, Africa, Africa. Louder and louder, more insistent, until resisting became more painful than obeying. They sold everything. 7 children, few bags, faith as the only guarantee. They boarded in April 1908. The crossing was long and brutal. Jenny got seasick easily. The children cried. John stared at the endless horizon and wondered if he was being courageous or completely insane. They arrived in South Africa in the spring. The work exploded like fire in dry grass. Crowds, impossible healings, conversions by the thousands, 100 churches born in months, and Jenny, his fragile yet strong Jenny, worked beside him, cooking for the starving, praying for the sick, cradling the dying in her arms. The pace was brutal. He didn't see it, or he saw it and chose not to stop. Because how do you stop healing when there are lines of people waiting? How do you say no when mothers bring dying children in their arms? 6 months after they arrived, Jenny began to falter. Just a little at first. Nothing alarming. He had unavoidable commitments. She smiled the way she always smiled and said she'd be fine. He left for a neighboring town. 3 days of intense preaching. When he returned, the house was silent, the kind of silence that screams. And now, kneeling in that African room beside Jenny's cold body, John G. Lake faced the question that would break or define every day he had left. Had God called him to this, or had he chosen ministry above her? The funeral was too quick to be fair. African soil falling on simple wood, 7 children standing, trying to understand what never again meant. John held the youngest in his arms, feeling the small weight tremble against his chest. People sang hymns in Zulu and English, voices rising to heaven like smoke. He didn't sing. He couldn't open his mouth without something inside him shattering completely. Afterward, the house filled with people bringing food and condolences. Kind words that didn't reach where the pain lived. She's at peace. God had a plan. You did what you could. Each phrase was a dull knife. He thanked them with nods, empty eyes until everyone left, and only the silence Jenny used to fill remained. That night, alone after putting the children to bed, John sat at the kitchen table and stared at the Bible open before him. James 5:15. The prayer of faith will save the sick. The words accused him. Where was faith when she needed it most? He had prayed, cried out, fasted, and heaven had remained mute as stone. The temptation to return to America was deafening. Take the children, board the first ship, find secure work, bury this African madness alongside Jenny, and never speak of it again. It would be reasonable, no one would judge him. 7 orphans needed stability, not a broken father chasing miracles on a continent that had cost him everything. But while considering escape, something began to burn inside him. It wasn't comfort, it was fury, a holy rage against everything death represented. If he left now, death would win twice. First Jenny, then the purpose for which she'd given her life. No, he wouldn't give death that satisfaction, so he made the most irrational and most certain decision of his life. He would stay, remain in Africa, raise his children here, and wage war against sickness, poverty, and despair with an intensity that would make death retreat. But vowing war is easy. Waging war is something else. The first weeks were fog. He woke, fed the children, preached because meetings were scheduled, returned, and collapsed. His oldest daughter, only 13, assumed the role of mother to the other children. John watched her sewing torn clothes, combing hair, singing lullabies Jenny sang, and something in him broke and rebuilt at the same time. Prayer requests kept coming. People don't stop getting sick because you're grieving. A mother brought a child with fever that wouldn't break for days. John looked at the small face, red, sweating, and felt the old fury rise. He laid on hands, didn't pray gently, he commanded. The fever broke instantly. The child opened her eyes, asked for food. The mother cried and tried to pay with eggs. He refused and asked her to pray for his children. Cases began multiplying. A man blind in one eye recovered his sight while John preached. He hadn't even prayed for him specifically. The man simply started screaming that he could see. A woman with a tumor on her neck woke one morning and the lump was gone. A paralytic rose from his mat and walked out. News like that travels fast. Soon the lines at John's door became crowds. He worked like someone possessed by something greater than grief. He rose before dawn, prayed until his body ached, visited the sick in huts where poverty smelled like desperation, laid hands on lepers no one would touch, preached in markets, under trees, anywhere there were ears. And God moved, not like a breeze, like a storm. One day, local scientists heard about him. Skeptical doctors wanting to expose the charlatan. They asked to examine his hands while he prayed for the sick. They connected equipment. They measured. And they found something they couldn't explain. An energy, a vibration, something the instruments detected but science couldn't name. One called it divine current. Another, more cautious, wrote in the records, Inexplicable phenomenon, undeniable results. The churches being born multiplied like seeds in fertile soil, 10, then 20, then 50. Converts by the thousands. People who'd never heard the name of Jesus now proclaimed him with unshakable conviction. And at the center of it all, a broken man who refused to let brokenness have the final word. But something else was happening inside John. The pain of losing Jenny wasn't diminishing, it was transforming. Every healed patient was a declaration. Death, you don't win here. Every paralytic walking was a shout. Jenny didn't die for nothing. He carried her memory as fuel, not as weight. He transformed grief into mission. Until one night, 4 years after the funeral, John received a letter that would change everything again. The envelope came from America, Spokane, Washington, a group of believers asking him to return. They said America was spiritually dead and needed the fire burning in Africa. He held the letter for a long time, looked around the house where Jenny had died, where the children had grown, where thousands had found life, looked at the African soil through the window, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to ask, Lord, what comes next? The answer came not in words, but in certainty. He wasn't finished. He was only beginning. The journey back was strange. The same ocean, the same water, but John wasn't the same man who'd crossed years before. The children, now older, watched the American coast appear on the horizon with curious eyes. They had no clear memories of this place. Africa was their home. John watched in silence, feeling the weight of bringing them to a land that was both familiar and completely foreign. Spokane, Washington, was cold. Not just in climate, snow covering the streets, cutting wind, but in spiritual atmosphere. The churches were full but empty. People sang hymns without conviction. They prayed with politeness, not expectation. Everything was civilized, controlled, dead. John felt the same restlessness he'd felt before going to Africa. America was spiritually frozen, but he hadn't come to observe. He'd come to ignite. He rented a simple building downtown and hung a sign on the door. Healing Rooms. But there was no mystery, no elaborate ritual, just a room where anyone at any time could enter and receive prayer. Some thought it absurd, others, desperate enough to try anything, came. The first was a man with arthritis so severe he could barely hold a cup. John gave no speech. He simply placed his hands on the swollen joints and commanded the pain to leave. The man blinked, looked at his own hands, opened and closed his fingers. For the first time in years, no pain. He ran out of the room, shouting to anyone who would listen. News like that spreads like fire in a small town. The next day, there was a line at the door. A week later, the line wrapped around the block. People came from neighboring states. Blind, deaf, paralyzed, given up by doctors. John and the team that formed around him worked from morning to night, laying on hands, declaring healing. Watching the impossible happen so frequently, it began to seem normal. A woman with terminal cancer arrived in a wheelchair, yellowed skin, sunken eyes. Doctors had sent her home. There was nothing more to do. John prayed, nothing dramatic, just simple words. Quiet authority. She returned to the hospital the following week. Doctors ran new tests. The cancer had disappeared, not diminished, disappeared. They had no explanation. She did. John G. Lake prayed for me. Newspapers began covering it. Skeptical reporters came to expose the charlatan and left writing headlines they themselves barely believed. Miracles in Spokane. Science cannot explain. A local doctor, frustrated with the reports, decided to document each case personally. He recorded everything. Names, diagnoses, medical witnesses before and after. In 5 years, he documented over 100,000 cases of healing. 100,000, not partial healings or subjective improvements. Complete, verifiable, undeniable healings, and John charged nothing, not a penny. When people offered money, he refused or directed it to the poor. "We don't sell what God gives freely," he said. Scientists came again, this time with more sophisticated equipment. They wanted to understand what happened when John prayed. They measured temperature, electricity, radiation, and they found something extraordinary. When he laid hands on the sick, the instruments detected what they described as living particles of light flowing from him to the patient. One scientist wrote in his report, "I observed an energy our science cannot yet name, but which produces results our medicine cannot reproduce." John read these reports with interest, but without surprise. He knew what it was. It wasn't his. It was the power of the risen Christ flowing through a broken vessel that refused to stay broken. But while crowds came seeking healing, John faced battles no one saw. There were nights he woke sweating, dreaming of Jenny, of the African room, of the question that never completely left him. Could I have done differently? There were days when loneliness weighed so heavy he could barely get out of bed. The children were grown now, building their own lives. The house was too quiet, and criticism came too. Religious leaders accused him of showmanship. Doctors called him dangerous. Some said he drove people away from proper treatment. John listened in silence and kept doing what he knew how to do, laying hands on the desperate and watching them rise, healed. Until one winter afternoon in 1935, while preaching in a small church, John felt something different, a pressure in his chest, a fatigue that wasn't just tiredness. He finished the sermon, prayed for the sick as he always did, went home and lay down. He knew what was happening. The body that had served as a channel for so much life was finally yielding. He was 65 years old. He'd lived longer than most. He'd given everything. That night, lying alone in the dark, John felt no fear. He thought of Jenny. He thought of the siblings buried in Canadian soil. He thought of the hundreds of thousands who'd seen God's power through him. And he smiled. "Lord," he whispered, "it was a good war." Days later, John G. Lake closed his eyes for the last time. But the fire he'd lit still burned. But death isn't the end of the story when you live for something greater than yourself. The healing rooms kept operating after John departed. The team he'd trained continued laying on hands, praying with the same authority they'd learned from him. The fire didn't go out, it multiplied. People who were healed in the rooms returned as intercessors. Former paralytics praying for the blind, former dying declaring life over the dying. The revival that began with one broken man now belonged to a multitude. Churches in Spokane and beyond began to change. What had been polite, dead religion was invaded by something wild and alive. People fell under God's power in the middle of services. Others were healed while simply sitting in the pews. Young people had visions, old people prophesied. It was chaotic, it was glorious. It was exactly what John always wanted, a Christianity that didn't fit in boxes. Decades later, pastors and missionaries still told stories about John G. Lake, not as distant legend, but as evidence that God still moves, that the impossible still yields, that an ordinary man broken by loss can become a channel for the extraordinary if he refuses to quit. Because that's what the story of John G. Lake really is, a declaration of war against resignation. He could have become bitter when Jenny died, could have blamed God and returned to America defeated, could have accepted that some things simply happen and there's nothing to do. But he didn't accept it. He transformed pain into fuel, made loss a purpose, and refused to give death the last word. And here's the truth that shakes. The same power that operated through him is available today. Not because John was special. He wasn't a prophet from the womb. He didn't have angels visiting his cradle. He was an insurance salesman who buried half his siblings and watched his wife die young. But he did something few do. When he broke, Instead of resigning, he surrendered. He stopped trying to control and started obeying. He stopped negotiating with God and started trusting. The revival Spokane saw wasn't the result of method. It was the result of surrender, of a man who decided he'd rather die trying than live settled, who'd rather fail pursuing the impossible than succeed at the mediocre. And the call that burned in John G. Lake's chest still burns today. There are still sick people waiting. There are still broken hearts needing comfort. There are still entire cities sleeping spiritually, waiting for someone to dare wake them. The question isn't whether God still wants to move. The question is whether there are still people willing to pay the price, because revival costs. It cost John his wife, his financial security, his reputation, his peace. But he knew something our generation has forgotten. There are things worth losing everything for. There are causes greater than comfort. There are battles that deserve every drop of blood. And maybe, as you listen to this story, something inside you is waking. Maybe you're tired of a faith that transforms nothing, tired of polite prayers that don't move mountains, tired of watching the impossible stay impossible because no one dares challenge it. If that's the case, then John G. Lake's life isn't ancient history. It's prophecy about you. You don't need all the answers. John didn't have them. You don't need to be perfect. He wasn't. You just need to be willing to be broken, willing to obey when the order doesn't make sense, willing to lay hands on the impossible and decree that Jesus' name is still powerful. The world doesn't need more comfortable Christians. It needs people with fire in their chest and compassion in their hands. It needs those who weep for the sick and then do something about it. It needs those who transform pain into mission, loss into purpose, brokenness into power. John G. Lake was that man, and when he departed, the mantle didn't disappear. It stayed waiting for whoever dares pick it up. So the question that closes this story is the same one that opens it. What will you do with the fire being lit in your heart right now? Because if this story disturbed you, if something inside you refused to accept that things have to be the way they are, then maybe the same God who proved John G. Lake is proving you now. Maybe this isn't the end of his story. Maybe it's the beginning of yours. Pray for the sick, fast for the lost, cry out for the impossible. And don't accept anything less than seeing heaven invade earth through you, not because you're special, but because he is, and he still searches for broken vessels willing to carry glory. The revival John saw didn't die with him. It's asleep, waiting for hearts hungry enough to awaken it. May your heart be one of them. And if this story set your heart on fire, subscribe now. Every week we bring you new heroes of faith, men and women who were tested in the fire and refused to be extinguished. Don't let that fire grow cold.